Hello and welcome to Horror Movie Mania Brackets. That's Horror Movie Mania Brackets, where we're going to watch 68 movies. Not actually watch them, but analyze them to see who is going to be king of the Haunted Hill. I'm Vic Casserole, along with Ophidian Riley, our crack horror analyst, to give you the skinny. Now, just to give you a little bit of information on how these movies were selected. We had a crack staff of very mysterious, highly entertaining, very unusual people who are experts on horror movies. They sat in a room with closed doors, and they used a variety of metrics to figure out what, in fact, are the 68 best horror movies out there. They used stats like audience approval ratings, Rotten Tomatoes approval ratings, and a brand new metric called SPM, or scares per minute. You've seen the brackets, Ophidian. How do you think the selection process went?
I have, and it's interesting that you have mentioned crack twice now up to this point in the broadcast. Is there a metric involved that measures the amount of crack in the movie, since crack staff, crack analyst, crack movies?
Yeah, you know, I was not involved in those closed doors meetings, but so they may well be. I don't know. Good question.
The brackets are interesting in that there are some inclusions you wouldn't have expected. There's some snubs you wouldn't have expected. You could argue that the 1930s are overrepresented. You could also argue that the omission of the Wolfman and the Mummy from that 30s group of contenders is a startling oversight by the crack team. On the other end of the spectrum, recently, it's interesting that It Follows makes the cut, and it seems to be the standard bearer, and this might be related to the scares per minute. It might be the standard bearer for an incoming new wave of horror that is omitted from the bracket. There's no Hereditary, there's no Midsummer, there's no The Vavitch, which is the way they spell it, and there is no Babadook, which many people, not myself, but many people consider the greatest horror movie of the last 10 years. So the brackets are interestingly constructed, highly controversial, and I'm only skimming the top of the controversy in this brief analysis. There's way deeper to go in this horror iceberg, Vic.
Absolutely, Ophidian. I agree. There's a lot of material out there, and how they pick these movies is a little bit of a mystery, as we described. And you're right, there are some interesting omissions, some interesting inclusions, for sure. The Mummy, I don't know where it's been wrapped up. But let's take a look at some of our stats. Our graphics team has created this wonderful stat just to give an idea of the scope of these movies. You mentioned the 1930s. Well, the oldest movie, in fact, is The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari from 1920, 100 years ago, my friend.
Have you seen that?
I have seen The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Okay.
It's not fast-paced.
No. But this is where the arguments get interesting, because you could argue that a lot of these other movies don't exist without a movie like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, or Nosferatu, which is also in the bracket, or Freaks, which is also in the bracket. They're way pavers, they're innovators, but they're not improvers. So are they the best horror film out there, or are they just the one that opened the door, the cabinet door, if you will, for the rest of these movies to come through?
Absolutely. Some of these definitely paved the way for the later movies, that is for sure. And, you know, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, you got to give it props because, you know, what they were thinking about in 1920s in Germany, I don't know, but clearly they had horror on their mind. The most recent movie on this list is Us. Just came out last year, 2019. Jordan Peele was very successful with Get Out. And then a year later, he gave us Us. Thoughts on that?
Us has got a very hard road to the championship because it is starting out in the madness bracket, which is a very highly competitive bracket. It's hard to pick. I think in light of the fact that Get Out is such a superior film, many of the voters of this particular bracket, the competition is going to favor Get Out, and thinking they've recognized Jordan Peele, I think Us is probably going to exit the competition early.
Good call. That makes sense. Okay, moving from one two-letter movie to the next, the highest grossing movie on our list is It. from 2017 that grossed $327.5 million. And speaking of highest grossing films, of course, the adjusted gross favorite is Jaws, which by today's dollars would be over $1 billion.
Now, this is interesting because the graphics pictured, this is probably, you could argue they've bought their way onto the list because there's a lot of controversy over 3 of the films on this graphic. It is in the madness bracket. It is a supernatural creature. So why is it in the madness bracket and not the supernatural bracket or the creature bracket, particularly when in the creature bracket is the Invisible Man, which is a man. It's not a creature. It's in the title, the Invisible Man, and that belongs in the madness bracket. So why aren't it and the Invisible Man in the opposite brackets where they would actually make sense? Now, other critics have noted that Jaws is not truly a horror film. Jaws is a lot of things. It's considered the first summer blockbuster, and it is, as you noted, the highest grossing movie on our list when adjusted for inflation, but it is by most critics considered to be an adventure film and not a horror film because a shark, while scary, is still just a shark. It ain't no deep blue sea. It ain't no Meg. Those are creatures. Jaws is not. And then the trifecta of controversy on this here graphic, Silence of the Lambs in the madness category, not only is it in the madness category as a horror film, where it's more likely described as a suspense thriller, it is seated in the top spot of the madness bracket ahead of Halloween. When you're having a conversation about the top horror films of all time, Halloween is going to come to a lot of people's lips. The name of the film is synonymous with horror, and so to pick Silence of the Lambs as a top seed, you know the John Carpenter camp has got to be very upset with this turn of events, Vic.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you have to wonder if when they were looking at the madness category, the selection committee has some madness themselves. That's for sure.
That's for sure, Vic.
Yep, and so you've covered Silence of the Lambs, and then finally on the list with the most Oscar nominations, it only won 2, but the most Oscar nominations was The Exorcist from 1973, and that is a top seed in the Supernatural division.
Now, The Exorcist, the Vegas odds makers, the bookmakers, have The Exorcist as the favorite to run the entire thing. There's a whole lot of conversation out there. I saw today somebody was saying nothing beats Dawn of the Dead. And there's definitely a case to be made for that. Alien, the top seed in the creature category, it's got a shot. My personal favorite is The Thing, and I think it's going to do very, very well. And I think Dawn of the Dead's an interesting path to the top, and I think we'll get to that later. But The Exorcist is the favorite to win it all.
That makes sense. I think the Vegas odds are often right, but that's why we play the games, right?
That is why we play the games. Shocking upsets are shocking upsets, Vic.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so we had an overview of some of the interesting stats that we could take a look at. So now what we're going to do is take a look at some number 1 seeds. We mentioned a couple of them.